What's actually happening in a woman's brain during perimenopause and menopause?
If you're having these symptoms for the first time, you've never really had depression or anxiety, and all of a sudden in midlife you're having that. Well, that's something like, oh, maybe I should be thinking about this being related to hormones.
Is it just me, or is there an epidemic of women in their 40s and 50s like being diagnosed with ADHD?
Executive functioning has to do with your ability to plan, your ability to memorize, and to really stay on task. And executive functioning in the brain is impaired when you have these hormonal fluctuations. Just remind yourself that, life doesn't have to be this overwhelming. And when your body is saying, I can't anymore, it's more difficult, listen and simplify, and you will be happier.
Dr. Judith Joseph, welcome to MenoPositive.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
You just landed in London.
Yes.
From New York, right?
Yes.
How are you feeling?
Good. I was actually listening to some Snoop Dogg on the plane. So.
Oh, yeah. I love it. Who doesn't love Snoop Dogg?
So I just came back from LA, and whenever I fly into LA, I put on Dr. Dre and Snoop, and I'm set.
You're set. Okay, that's a good way to start your your week in London.
Yes.
Okay, so let's start with the basics, because what we hear on this show a lot from women, and I'm sure you hear it in your practice, is this feeling of they're losing themselves. What's actually happening in a woman's brain during perimenopause and menopause?
Well, the losing themselves is something I call identity shift. And it's not like the midlife crisis. It's different. People feel like they're not themselves because their body's changing. They feel like the abilities they once had are not quite there. The moodiness, the poor sleep, all of these things make you feel like you're losing your sense of self, which is, I think, very distressing. And it's one of the things that's really hard to study. In fact, it's only now really being studied, although it's one of the most common symptoms that people experience. And what happens is that you don't realize that hormones are everywhere in your body, from your toes to the top of your head, right? And these changes impact every fiber of your being. But, people are only starting to talk about that now. And so I like to talk about the mental health symptoms related to these hormonal shifts because I'm a psychiatrist. And also because it's really the first signs that you're going through this. However, it's often overlooked or misdiagnosed. So it's important to be able to identify those first signs.
And so, what's the difference between mental health and emotional health?
Very good question. So, emotions is more of like a lay term. It's like how you're feeling, what's your mood. Mental health encapsulates the brain. So, for example, a mental health symptom is poor sleep. A mental health symptom is problems with your thinking, right? But people don't necessarily say, well, that's emotional health, right? Emotions is how you feel. So think about feeling versus the brain and everything that encompasses it. So a mental health symptom can be an emotional symptom, but a mental health symptom can also be a cognitive or thinking issue. A mental health symptom can be a sleep issue, right?
I never thought of a mental health issue being sleep.
Yes, because the brain encapsulates all of those things. So within your brain, which I think is the most important organ, but I'm a psychiatrist, so I'm a bit biased. Within the brain, so much happens. The brain sends signals to your body to relax at nighttime. Your brain has something called it's basically a pituitary gland that controls the natural sources of melatonin. The brain also, controls parts of your sense of self. So your thinking, your decision making, your personality, your fight or flight, your regulatory emotional being, right? So the brain can do so many things. So when you think about all the things that are under this umbrella of the brain, one of the things under that umbrella are emotions, but also sleep, and also, your sense of self, and also your thinking, right? Your ability to remember things or to organize yourself or plan. So the brain does a lot of different things. And that's why I try to help people understand there's emotions, but then there's mental health and well-being. So think of emotions plus other things under this whole umbrella of mental health.
Thank you for breaking that down for me. Now, societally and culturally, there I think there's a bit of a fine line between advocating for hormone-related awareness, especially related to cognitive function, um, and not having it used against us. Like, I want people to know about brain fog, but then I don't want you to turn around and go, "Oh, you've got menopause brain," or "You've got brain fog," or put women in a position, we are in a time in our careers where we are quite senior, like, looking at quite senior roles, and for somebody to turn around and go, like, maybe question a woman's, um, being right for a job, but then having this brain fog used against us, I hate that. I hate that. So how do you talk about mood or brain fog without reducing women to their hormones?
Well, it's interesting because within cognitive conditions, you have a range. And I think that people kind of get the things confused. They think, oh, you're starting to have this decline in your midlife. That is not the same as having, let's say, a dementia. A dementia is a more progressive, degenerative condition where over time you are losing these cognitive capacities and they're not going to come back, right? Whereas you have periodic episodes of mental fog that are not indicative of degenerative, breakdown, right? Those brain cells aren't breaking down. They're having some temporary issues, right? So it's very different. But I think when it comes to women in general, the world has all or nothing thinking, right? Either you're hot or you're not. Either you're prime or you're, in the past, And so I think that we have to be aware of the biases that, society projects onto us. And we have to dig in our heels and say no, right? And we also have to recognize when it's happening to us so that we can use tools so that these issues don't hold us back because they don't have to. But, the messaging is really, really important. And so if someone came to you and they said, I'm having a really tough time, you wouldn't necessarily say, oh, well, like, you're done for, if someone's having an emotional breakdown or they're going through something with their family. But that's the messaging that we get when someone's having these hormonal fluctuations and saying that they're having these symptoms related to it. It's like, oh, well, you're done for. No, it's not the same. It's not a finite thing. It doesn't mean that, your condition is going to stay as is. These are fluctuations. These symptoms come and go, and it's best to know how to manage it so that it doesn't hold you back from the things that you want to do.
I love this idea. This is not something that is like you're not going into decline. There are things you can do to strengthen your cognitive function. But there are some women, talking about how society projects it when they experience mood changes or fatigue, um, they think they have it like they're having depressive symptoms or it's anxiety, but there is a very clear difference between them. I mean, you talked about it here that it's not necessarily decline, but and I also want to be clear, menopause is not a mental health issue,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Like, but how can women, and I think even doctors know the difference when a woman comes in with symptoms.
Well, I use something called the 3 Ps that I developed to help people to identify it. So, with mental health symptoms like depression, when you look at the diagnostic criteria, if you use the ICD, which is like the global WHO type of term, but then you look at the US, the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. Under depression, you won't see anything about physical symptoms. So you won't see, changes such as hot flashes. You won't see palpitations. You won't see the skin changes, right? It's not physical. So that's how you know. That's one of the P's. If you're having physical changes, you're noticing maybe you're a little more achy or, changes in your skin here, all the things I mentioned, the hot flashes, that's more likely to be due to hormonal fluctuations, perimenopause or menopause. The second P is period changes. So again, in that coding, you're not going to see anything saying, that you're having period changes with major depressive disorder and none of the global type of coding. So if you're having period changes, that's another P that you have to be like, oh my gosh, okay, maybe this is it. And then the third P is your past. So people who have a past history of something like a major depressive disorder, they're more likely to be vulnerable during hormonal fluctuations. So they're more likely to have a postpartum depression or have perimenopausal or menopausal mood fluctuations, or if you've past trauma, so the past can really inform the present. But if you're having these symptoms for the first time, you've never really had depression or anxiety, and all of a sudden in midlife you're having that. Well, that's something like, oh, maybe I should be thinking about this being related to hormones. So the 3 Ps are really helpful. And it's not just empowering to know, but they can prevent you from being treated with something that may cause worsened symptoms. Let's say, SSRIs, antidepressants are not warranted in your case, and you're already having low libido and you're already having weight gain. Well, you add on an SSRI, you're going to have worsened that in some cases, right? In other cases, it may actually help, right? So it's not to say there's anything wrong with meds, but you want to have the right diagnosis because if you do choose hormone, that not just helps the symptoms of the mental health, the the mood related to the mental health, the mood related to hormone fluctuations, but it helps the physical symptoms. And many times when your physical symptoms improve, your mental health improves as well.
And I think that is probably where maybe journaling or noting your symptoms over time will help you when you go to see a doctor or go to see a specialist, then it's not just, "I'm just feeling really low." Like, "Oh, but actually I did have this hot flash 2 weeks ago," because it does take us on a bit of a roller coaster ride. You don't have hot flashes every day, so maybe tracking all of that can be really helpful, so to go into a specialist to get the right diagnosis.
Yes, it's very helpful, and some of my patients, they'll say, "You know, I knew." I have a lot of patients who have primary major depressive disorder, but then they have a really hard time when they're going through midlife and going through hormonal fluctuations. But they know that it's time to make adjustments in their hormone treatment when they're having excessive physical symptoms plus changes in their mood, right? So they will come to me and say, "Actually, I think this is due to I need an adjustment in my hormonal health, right? So I'm gonna go to my OB/GYN or, my hormone doctor because I'm having the physical symptoms too." So they're starting to learn that like, oh, wow, like again, hormones travel throughout the bloodstream. They're everywhere in our body. So if you're having these physical symptoms and the mental health symptoms, maybe you should be seeing the hormone doctor before adjusting the antidepressant, right? So it's very empowering and it allows patients to have more agency.
I hope everybody's taking notes as they're listening, like, pull over in the car, take some notes here. This is super enlightening. Now, is it just me, or is there an epidemic of women in their 40s and 50s, like, being diagnosed with ADHD?
Yeah, so well,
Because
it's
this
not
is another thing, like,
you.
is it brain fog, or is it, executive functioning, or so it's not just depression and anxiety, but, you're hearing this all the time.
Well, I wish I could say it's just midlife. I'm having so many people coming in because I think TikTok, right? There's so many ADHD influencers, so everyone thinks, "Oh my gosh, I can't concentrate. I have ADHD." Mind you, the world is so different. We're like on devices, we're watching TV, we're overwhelmed. So there are a lot of reasons to lack focus. But yeah, people in midlife are having symptoms of brain fog and they are being misdiagnosed as having ADHD. ADHD by definition is a childhood condition. If you didn't have problems with planning, focusing, organization, hyperactivity under the age of 12, then likely it's not ADHD, creeping up in midlife. Now, it's possible that you had undiagnosed ADHD. A lot of women go undiagnosed because people think people with ADHD are typically boys who are hyper. But girls are, again, society tells us to behave. So we learned at an early age to mask our symptoms, to be the good girl. So even though the boy with ADHD is running around the classroom, the girl with ADHD, she's twirling her hair, she's tapping her leg, she's zoning out. All are symptoms of ADHD, but it doesn't look like the classic hyper kid. So she gets misdiagnosed. And that's problematic because undiagnosed ADHD travels with depression because you feel as if you're not reaching your full potential, because it's really hard to focus your efforts when everyone else seems to be doing things just fine. There's a lot of low confidence that travels with a lot of anxiety. So untreated ADHD and undiagnosed ADHD is problematic. But chances are, if you didn't have these symptoms, before the age of 12, this is related to hormonal fluctuation.
One of the things I do love about you and what I've been reading and listening is that you just seem to have a bigger toolbox of options than everybody else. It's like you're like the Mary Poppins, with that magic bottomless bag that she had, because not everyone wants to get on meds. Not everyone is ready for HRT. What are some of the options you recommend to women who want to strengthen their cognitive and brain health and feel better without the pressure of prescriptions?
Well, there's a great therapy called organizational skills therapy. Most therapists have never heard of it, but I happen to treat children, adolescents, adults, and elders. And Organizational skills therapy is typically used in children with ADHD. And a lot of children with ADHD can't tolerate stimulants like Adderall, Ritalin, the amphetamines, methylphenidates.
Yeah.
Um,
Equisim, I think we have it here, Elvan, those are some of
Mhm,
the
they're different
names in the
names, yeah,
UK, yeah.
yeah. So, many times they can't tolerate it because they cause problems with appetite or problems with sleep, so we have to have behavioral interventions to help them, and organizational skills therapy is one of those things that helps to simplify your life. So, when you think about the brain, if the brain of someone who already has challenges with focusing on organization, if that brain is overwhelmed with, "I have to do this, this, that, and this," it's only gonna do 1 or 2 of those things or it'll just shut down, right? And so organizational skills helps that ADHD brain to prioritize so that you're picking one thing to do really well. It helps that brain to plan ahead. It helps that brain to use like these tips and tricks to color code. And so what you'll see is in organizational skills is we use kind of old school things like planners, file cabinets, decluttering, something called a launch pad where you put a bowl or whatever it is at one part of your home or work or school where you put the things that you commonly lose, like your keys, your wallet, your earbuds, whatever it is that you tend to spend like 30 minutes driving everyone crazy looking for. These are the tools that ADHD brains use. And what we found is that organizational skills helps in all areas of executive functioning. Executive functioning has to do with your ability to plan, your ability to memorize, and to really stay on task. And executive functioning in the brain is impaired when you have these hormonal fluctuations. It's also impaired in things like dementia, and ADHD, right? Anything that's cognitive in nature. So having this set of skills and toolbox that you can use every day to organize your life and to decrease that burden and stress on the brain allows you to function better.
It just takes some of the, overwhelm away? So is that kind of like getting everything organized before you go to bed type of thing so that when you
Yes,
wake up, your morning might be able to run smoother? Is that an example of that?
that
Of how it
is.
might
So
work?
your tomorrow starts tonight. So what you'll do with organizational skills is you'll have the person look at your day, right? You plan the next, so you're looking at your day. Okay, my first meeting is at so and so time. So I'm gonna put this on a whiteboard. This is the location. This is the time I need to get there. And this is at night. You're just starting at night. I'm gonna lay out my clothes for the night. I'm gonna put everything in my launch pad at my door, my keys, wallet, glasses, the things that I'm constantly looking, for. I'm going to go to bed a little bit earlier and practice some good sleep hygiene, right? So you're essentially setting up your day to put the least amount of burden on your brain. So you wake up in a good mood because you know where everything is, you know what's going to happen. And because when you have these stresses on executive functioning, it increases anxiety, you're essentially cleaning out things to worry about. So you can just go forward with your day. And these small behavioral interventions go a long way. So imagine waking up not having your clothes ready, can't find your keys, don't know what your plan is for the day. All of that is stress on the brain that is unnecessary and could have been avoided. And it just sets you off on the wrong pace for the day. And it also, worsens your mood, which is already a challenge, right? It worsens your sleep because you're worrying about it the night before. So all of these things worsen when you're not having this toolkit, the skill set to help you make life easier.
'Cause you feel bad about yourself because 'cause you're like, "Oh, I'm not organized enough," or "I'm gonna be late," or I was in between jobs once, and I took a week, and I went to Canyon Ranch
Yeah.
in Arizona,
Uh-huh.
and I went to a talk on brain health, and I distinctly remember the guy because society puts such a positive spin on multitasking, like, "You're so great at multitasking," and he said multitasking makes you stupid
Yes.
because we're all actually trying to do too much, right? If we just focused on one thing at a time, then we'd be able to get through the day.
Right, but as women, we're often mothers, we have careers, we take care of our parents, so we just get so accustomed to multitasking that when we can no longer multitask, again, we feel as if we're losing our sense of self. But this is who I am. But you were someone before you multitask. So just remind yourself that, life doesn't have to be this overwhelming. And when your body is saying, I can't anymore, it's more difficult, listen and simplify, and you will be happier.
And there's nothing wrong with you, right? You just need to simplify or take some things off your to-do list. What about affect labeling? You talk about this, how it's important to name our feelings. Is that another tool?
Affect labeling is really important. It is essentially, in therapy speak, the way to label your emotions so you have less uncertainty. The human brain doesn't like uncertainty. We wanna know what's happening, you know? When you name your emotions, it's almost as if you're turning the light on. So I often use this analogy of, let's say you're in a really dark room, you can't see anything, it's pitch black, you hear a loud crash, you don't know what it is. Some of us would start freaking out, others would start running, some would start, punching the air. But if you turn the light on and you saw, oh, like this bookshelf fell, I'm safe, that in itself is therapeutic because you're decreasing the uncertainty, you know what you're working with. When you name your emotions, when you name what's happening, it is almost like you're turning the light on and you're no longer afraid. So when you know that, oh, I'm not having dementia, this is a brain fog, I'm having, forgetfulness, then it's like, "Ooh, okay. I'm not gonna have I'm not gonna be in some home one day not knowing my kids," right? That in itself is powerful. And what happens is that when you name it, "Okay, this is brain fog. I'm gonna use these tools to help me." Let's say you're having word finding difficulty, right? It's a tip of the tongue. You're about to say something, you don't remember it. Rather than going down the rabbit hole, you know it's brain fog. You know that you're gonna be okay, and you know you may just need to, like, take a beat or take a deep breath or just, like, maybe defer to someone else in the room, and that will allow you to emotionally regulate so that you get your bearings again. But if you don't know what it is, then you start to panic, and then things get worse. So that's why it's important to be able to name it.
This makes so much sense. I mean, I think for me, I remember seeing my doctor and I just said to her, "I just know that I'm not operating at 100%." It was taking me longer to write emails, or I'd write them and redraft them, or preparing a presentation, it was taking me a lot longer. And I know you love an acronym. What is TIES, and how can it help women regain some of this mastery, I guess, during the menopause transition?
Well, ties essentially are the main symptoms of menopause, of mental health related to menopause. The T is the thinking. So, cognitive issues like the tip of the tongue, you forgot what you're going to say, forgetfulness in general, losing things, problems with planning, organization. That's the thinking, stuff that's pretty common. And it's usually the first symptom, that and sleep. I is identity. So this is what you hear often, I don't feel like myself, my body's changing, my mood is changing. I just feel like I don't know who I am anymore. Very distressing symptom. The E is emotions. So TIE. Emotions can be anxiety, excessive worrying, feeling more moody, irritable, sad, teary. The S is sleep. And sleep is really important because sleep that's worsened can impact your thinking, can worsen how you feel about yourself, your identity, how you feel in general, and your emotions. So sleep is really, really important. Again, one of the earlier symptoms that we see where people are like, oh, I don't know why I can't sleep anymore. I guess I'm getting older. It's usually one of the first symptoms of these hormonal shifts. And it happens like it starts in the 40s. And, people are often looking for the hot flashes, but it's sleep and the brain fog that really starts early. So TIES, really helpful because it not just allows you to feel as if, something terrible isn't happening, right? This is a natural process, but also allows you to tailor your life and your tools to the symptoms that are the most problematic.
And I think when women know this, they feel more empowered, and when they understand what's going on, they can then make the choices of how they want to spend their time or where they want to put their energy in helping manage their symptoms. I also knew that you were menopositive when I heard you say that that women should prepare for menopause like they prepare for retirement.
Yes.
And that's what we're about here. I mean, menopositive is all about a positive, proactive approach to managing hormone shifts. How do you like to talk to women about preparing for this?
Well, it's interesting because I came into the menopause world because of my patients. So I was doing research in postpartum depression, and some of the older women that I was treating, they went straight from giving birth to going into perimenopause. And I just thought, wow, a lot of their symptoms look very similar to what I was seeing in postpartum depression. And in psychiatry, at least in the US, we weren't learning this. I mean, I had to do all this on my own. I had to learn about menopause and mental health on my own for my patients. So, I just really felt as if, I wasn't prepared as a physician. So I know my patients weren't prepared. And I'm one of those doctors who also has a business degree. So when I went to business school, a lot of my colleagues, they'd be talking to me about my retirement. And I did a medical business degree at the same time. So I was like going back and forth between medical school and business school.
You didn't get
And
much sleep, did
I
you?
did
Yeah.
not. But my friends who were in business school, they were all people who were in the finance sector before, and came back to school for their masters. That's how we do it in the US. But, they would always go with me through my portfolio, and I'd be like, "I don't have a portfolio. I'm a medical student. I'm broke," when I was a student. And they would say, "Well, you gotta start planning. Even though you're a medical student, you gotta start saving." And I was like, "Okay." So I'd started saving back then, and I just thought, "Well, why do we always save for our finances, but we don't save for the most important thing in terms of our portfolio, which is our health," right? You can be the richest person in the world, but if your body fails you, then what good is that money? So I want people to treat, their physical health as if they would their wealth, right? Start saving for menopause, for midlife in your 20s and 30s. In your 20s, that's where you should be thinking about your emotional health. You should be thinking about, let me cut back on these toxic people, right? That boyfriend that you've given 10, chances to, maybe like the 11th is the last one, right? The excessive smoking and drinking, all those things will impact you later in life. In your 30s, you don't want to be eating, rabbit food and staying on a treadmill. You want to really start lifting weights, eating protein, getting good sleep, taking care of mental health. In your 40s, you really want to consider surrounding yourself with people that are supportive because, during that time, you have small kids, you're taking care of, things at work. That's when you're really starting to be challenged at work because you got personal stuff and work stuff going on. So you really want to start to think about that community and also start looking for those signs that we talked about, the ties. So, you wanna start preparing before, you go into, menopause. You really wanna start preparing because all of those things allows you to have the best outcome. The studies show that people with less trauma, better emotional regulation do better in terms of the mental health symptoms. People who, eat protein and lift weights and do the weight-bearing exercises, they have less bone health issues. People who have less toxic habits have less cardiac, heart issues. So all of these things are a part of your wealth portfolio, not in terms of monetary value, but in terms of your health wealth.
And we should all be putting money in the bank,
Yes,
right? Money in the
yes.
bank so that we can withdraw. We might have to withdraw later
Right.
on.
Yeah.
I'd like to talk about your book, High Functioning Depression, HFD,
Yes.
because although it crosses generations, geographies, gender, in reading it, I felt the family matriarch or the midlife woman was the poster child for high functioning depression. Paint us a picture of what a woman with HFD might look like.
Well, high functioning depression is not yet recognized by the medical community because across the board in that coding, ICD and DSM, what really makes you meet criteria for depression is you have to break down. You have to have a lack of functioning and or you have to be in distress. Well, many women, we can't slow down. People depend on us. So we have these symptoms of depression, right? We have the guilt, the hopelessness, the sadness, the poor sleep, the low energy, all of these things, the lack of joy, anhedonia. But we don't break down. We, in fact, overfunction. We show up. And so there's nothing for us. There's no coding for us. There's no plan for us. There's no toolkit for us. But that's the majority of us. We're walking around with these symptoms and there's nothing for us. So I wanted to allow people to know that this is real. What you're experiencing has a term. And if you don't do the research, then it doesn't really exist. So I set out to do the first peer reviewed clinical study in high functioning depression in the world. And we enrolled 120 patients, interviewed them, and we found a correlation between past trauma and high functioning depression. So people who have high functioning depression, their way of coping with their pain is by busying themselves. When you think of trauma and you think of past pain, many times you think of, oh, the person doesn't want to be triggered, so they avoid people, places, situations. Well, those of us who are high functioning, we avoid dealing with that pain by working, by busying, by taking on more tasks. And it's very, very different than burnout. So when you think about burnout, burnout is caused by the occupation, the work, right? The work is causing the stress on the brain. You take that brain outside of the work, over time it gets better because the stress isn't there. High functioning, the symptoms are there on that brain at work. But when you take that brain outside of the work, they still can't relax. They're the ones taking on a side project. They're the one, helping their kids excessively, getting, out in the garden. They can't relax. When they're sitting still, they feel empty. When they are not working, they feel restless. So there's something within causing the symptoms in high functioning versus with burnout, it's the external environment causing the symptoms. So, if someone's listening to this and they resonate with this, you're not alone. Usually people, when they go through things, they shut down, but there are some of us who don't shut down. We just keep going. But eventually something's going to give. Either our health fails, or we do break down emotionally, or we cope in negative ways that are unhealthy, like excessively drinking or shopping, excessively spending. There are ways that we're soothing that are not adaptive. So we're missing out on joy, which we all have the right to, right? Joy is built within our DNA. It's our birthright as humans. So if you're lacking joy in life, this is a problem.
And this is fascinating as well because you touched on this a little bit, but when people come to see you, it's not because they're feeling depressed. They're coming to see you because they just don't feel right anymore, or their relationship is in trouble, or oh god, I don't know, like they're feeling burnout, like you said. So or they just feel meh. I think that's your medical term.
Right.
I just feel meh, and I totally get that. And like you said, they can organize their friend's birthday party, but I think you said before they just can't even organize feeding themselves or making sure they have enough water. And does it sometimes, I also find sometimes, does it present as like a physical ailment? Like why is it easier for somebody to say I have a lot of back pain versus them say I feel sad or I'm not feeling right?
The human brain likes to quantify. That's why we have money. Back in the day, it was really difficult to barter. We needed like concrete things. There's something about numbers. There's something about being able to touch it and feel it that makes it real for us. We're not great with the abstract. Some of us are excellent. The artists folks are, but most of us, we need to be able to see it. And that's why if we have pain in our bodies, it's like, well, look, this is something I can actually, feel and describe and show you. Whereas mental pain is very difficult to explain, and that's why it doesn't get the attention that it really deserves. Anhedonia is a term that literally means a lack of joy and pleasure. It's that meh, blah. And it's a scientific term. It's been around since the 1800s, but most people don't even know it exists, right? But it's a problem because it's an indicator that, either you have depression or unresolved trauma, or, it's very common in substance use disorders. But it's problematic because we were made to have joy. Joy is something that is built into our DNA because joy helps us survive obstacles. It helps us to get through illnesses. Joy keeps us going even when things are literally burning down around us, right? So if you can't access that joy, you're missing out on not just something that makes life worth living, but something that allows you to survive really difficult challenges.
What are the 3, so you mentioned anhedonia, but so what are the 3 signs of high functioning depression?
Usually people have anhedonia, and usually they have things that are unresolved in their past. So they're so accustomed to burying their emotions and burying the pain that burying emotions is their way of life. So you no longer feel the pain, but you also can't feel the joy. The other thing is people pleasing. Oftentimes, these are people who sacrifice their own pleasure, their own happiness for others, and it looks noble. It's rewarded on the outside, but at the end of the day, there's only one you. There's only ever going to be one you. So if you're not accessing joy and you're just living for others, you're essentially, you're not having what you deserve and you only get one life. And so I have to reframe that for a lot of people because they're programmed to push down their own needs to show up for others. But it's okay to advocate for yourself. Two things can be true. You can show up for yourself and still be a good person, still be a loving, giving, caring person. It doesn't mean that you're less than that.
And is there, you mentioned masochism as well. Is that the bit about always giving for
Yes.
others, always giving for work, but not having that moment for your time?
Yes, I
For
call
yourself, sorry.
masochism people pleasing because masochism gets flagged on, like, all the algorithms.
Yeah.
It won't get flagged on a podcast, but, like, you put masochism on socials and you get, like, dinged because they think you're talking about, like, sex. But, masochism is essentially a very old term in psychiatry that's no longer used. It's not PC to use it because, in the '80s, a lot of doctors would label women as masochists, essentially saying that they were inciting poor treatment onto themselves, that they wanted, poor treatment in a way, and it's very politically incorrect, and it should have been removed. It's rightfully so, but there are elements of it, such as people pleasing, like not allowing yourself to be praised or to enjoy great things and sacrificing your joy for others. So that's why I tend to only use the people pleasing portions of the masochistic personality disorder because they're problematic, victim blaming traits of the other portions of
Okay,
it.
I like your version better. I like your
Yes.
version better. Forget I asked the question. You have exercises in your book for people to see where they sit on a spectrum. But you also have a very powerful framework, the 5 V's, for how women can bring more joy back into their life. So, can you walk us through what they are and how women can use them daily?
So the 5 V's, I love the number 5 because I've traveled the world looking at mental health and 5 comes up across the globe. I think it's because most of us have 5 fingers, right? But the first V is validation. Validation is similar to that affect labeling, right? We said that when we identify a name and accept the emotion, it's like turn the light on. So name that emotion, accept it without judgment. If you're feeling depressed, say it, right? Don't sugarcoat it. Don't say I'm blue, say I'm depressed, If you're feeling frustrated, say that. If you're not sure how you're feeling, try and really understand it because a lot of times even the men who come into my practice, they'll say I'm so angry and I'm like, "Really? What are you angry about?" And we peel it back and it's like actually they're anxious and they may appear angry and irritable on the outside, but it's really coming from worrying. They worry so much. So name it, accept it without judgment. That's the first V, validation. The second V is venting. And when I have people come to my lab in New York City, I'll blow up a red balloon and everyone will take turns trying to dunk this red balloon in water. And 100% of the time that balloon pops up, right? You can't out math physics. It is what it is. And then we take turns deflating that balloon. And it's a powerful exercise to show them that, if you slowly let out those emotions, it becomes easier to manage, right? If you don't let those emotions out, it'll pop up in your relationships, pop up at work, pop up in your health, right? So that process of expressing those emotions by venting is really powerful. And venting can be verbal, it could be talking, it could be writing in a journal, it could be praying if you're faith-based, even singing, dancing, crying, getting those emotions out in a healthy way. Now, venting should not be trauma dumping. You shouldn't just be telling everyone how you feel without consent. You want to pick 1 or 2 people, if they're not your therapist, to say, "Is this an okay time to talk? Can I talk about something with you?" Ask for emotional consent and have an intention. Have the mindset of, "I'm going to get feedback." Not, "I wanna get this person on my side," but, "I really want a resolution from this conversation." So vent with intention and ask for consent. The third part is values. So values are things that bring us meaning and purpose in life. So think things that are priceless, not with price tags, like your family, your faith, causes you believe in. And, if people have a hard time with values, I'll ask them a question. I'll say, many times people don't even know what they value anymore. I'll say, if you had 5 minutes left on earth, what would you be thinking about? And they're not going to be thinking about the Porsche, right? They're going to be thinking, oh, I wish I had traveled more. I forgot how much I valued adventure, things like that. So tap into your values. And the fourth is vitals. Vitals are anything that you can do to support your brain and body. You only get one chance, so take care of it. And, the traditional vitals are sleep, movement, and nutrition, but there are non-traditional vitals that we don't think about, like our relationship with technology and how that's impacting our mental health. Our relationship with other people, because that's one of the top predictors of really like powerful long-term health. And our work-life balance, those boundaries are important. And then the fifth V
This one's your
is
favorite, isn't
vision. Yes,
it?
it's my favorite. Vision is how do you keep moving forward instead of getting stuck in the past, and how do you plan joy? So planning joy could be celebrating small wins, right? Like if you finish a project at work, or if you finish a podcast episode, rather than going on to the next, celebrate that win and acknowledge what you did. And it could be small, like, sitting down and having a cup of tea or, putting your feet up just for 5 minutes, listening to music. Celebrate those small wins as much as possible. And it's evidence based. It's actually based on research. So in our labs, when we study depression and sadness, the way that we can tell if someone's becoming happier is by adding up these little points, right? That's why I say points of joy, because if you eat your food and you savor it and it's yummy, well, we add that as a point. If you are tired and you take a nap and you wake up feeling refreshed, we say that's a point. If you're lonely and you reach out to a friend and you connect and you feel seen and loved, that's a point. If you're stressed and you're able to self soothe, we actually measure that tension as a point. So all of these little points add up to joy and happiness in research. But in the real world, we think, well, happiness is just one thing. It's just like this smile, but it's not. It's all of these little points. So if you can get as many of these points as possible, that's how you're becoming happier in life.
And I like to it's not about reinventing yourself. I think you say, like, you don't have to do new things. It's think of the things that already bring you joy and do more of that. My, one girlfriend has been saying that she just really wants more live music in her life. Like, she just feels great when she's, at live music event. So she's really booking more of that in. But that's a simple example of it, isn't it?
It is.
And I think you talk about fashion and style as well, like dressing, like if that makes you feel good, like dress
Yes.
for how you want to feel
Yes.
sometimes. I know I do that. I'll wear like really something really colorful when I need to be lifted up. I think I heard you say that when you go into the office and your hair is in a bun, that
Yeah.
means that you need to work, right? Like I'm focusing
Yeah.
today.
Yeah, those small things, they take a little bit of effort, but they bring joy, So, like, you may be like, "Oh, I don't think I'm gonna wear that bracelet today. It takes too long to clasp it." But when you put the bracelet on and you take the time to clasp it, you realize that throughout the day, that jingling noise is really stimulating, and throughout the day, you clutch it and you're like, "Oh, I remember when I bought this bracelet." Like, all these things are points of joy, so take the time to do those things and to engage in those points.
Dr. Judith, you say the goal isn't to be happy, it's to be happier. So, knowing what we know now about our mental and emotional health and menopause, what would you tell our 35-year-old listener?
Well, I would say start taking care of your mental health now. These are things like setting boundaries, learning who your real friends are, and learning who people are when they show you who they are. If someone's a hater and you don't feel good around them, like listen to yourself because that stress will worsen your outcome and you need a circle of friends. You need community. So, really pay attention to your mental health in your 30s and stop eating foods like you were in your 20s. Like, it's illogical. You shouldn't be eating rabbit food. You should be eating protein. You shouldn't be on the treadmill. You should be lifting weights.
What would you tell our 45-year-old listener?
Start building a community and setting boundaries at work because this is a challenging time for you. This is when your kids still really need you if you have kids, or this is when your parents really need you because they're starting to, show signs that they need more support. This is when your job is demanding a lot from you, right? So people are literally pulling at you from every single angle. So learn how to set boundaries and build a community.
And what would you tell our 55-year-old listener?
Well, this is a really exciting stage for you because you have seen so many things, you have so many experiences, and you still have so much left. Rather than scrutinizing yourself and criticizing yourself, start to really love yourself. This is the perfect time to be selfish and to say no without any guilt, right?
Dr. Judith Joseph, thank you so much for being part of the MenoPositive community. I was reading, well, first of all, we're going to let everybody know how to find you and where to buy your book in the show notes. But I wanted to bring you a little bit of joy today because I heard that you like dark chocolate and chocolate
Yes.
chip cookies. So I bake for all of my guests.
Aw.
And I have made you some dark chocolate sour cherry oatmeal cookies. Would you like to
Nice.
try one?
I would love
Yeah,
that.
please
Thank
go
you.
ahead.
Wow, you're so talented.
Oh, well, I don't know, you have to eat them first. I hope you
It's
enjoy
so
them.
pretty though. It looks very professional.
They were baked this morning.
Mm, they're good. I like them.
Yeah, will that
Mhm.
help you get you through the rest of the day?
Mhm. The cherries are good because ripe cherries are a natural source of melatonin.
So, is that okay you're eating them first thing in the morning?
Listen, it has dark chocolate though.
It does have the dark chocolate. You've got both, you've
Balances
got both.
it.
And if you're listening and feel called to share your journey with us or your favorite bits from today, please rate and review this episode and join the conversation on Instagram at menopositive.life. It really does make a big difference. See you next time.
I got a good feeling.